we got people to redo it for us. It's a 19th century building, which used to be a wood workshop. And the people we bought it from, we've known for a long time, and we told them whenever you're ready to go, we're going to try to buy. And so they were really pleased that we got it because they had seen what we did with our other center, which was much too small. And I asked that they take a picture and give it to me to break you, because I figure that in any crowd, you never can tell, you might find a millionaire. And if there are any millionaires present, I would like to ask them to make a sizable donation. Other than that, please admire the new building. It will open on the 27th of April. We are going to have a party, and you are all welcome to come to the party and to be part of the conference, two-day conference that will follow at this center, because we now will have the room to have such a conference, and our international network will gather, and then we'll have private meetings and in general have an international gathering. We have an international network. It is our only guarantee to stay sane, focused, anti-racist in the way that we want to be. Your international connections are a lifeline. I'm invited to speak to a cafe via Skype in Pakistan. This is not part of our international women's network, but you know, you gather people, you know, Crossroads is the crossroads of the world. And we meet all kinds of people who like what we do, and then we have an ongoing relationship with them, and they have a fantastic struggle going on in that particular area. Don't ask me what the name of the area is. I'm really not so good at that. Okay. What is the precise title of this meeting?
I don't think we were aiming for precision in the title. It was because what happens is we all come together and immediately subvert anyone's individual intentions for the meeting. So the idea, of course, as with all gatherings at 16 Beaver, is to come together around a series of questions or concerns. In this case, we had the opportunity, Selma, to encounter you.
Okay.
So
that's great.
You know.
Okay. Well, I'll tell you a few things, and then we'll have a dialogue. Is that all right?
We're having a little problem because I can't figure out where the earphones get in.
In the meantime, you know, maybe I could just say a couple words, because it's also the end of a very busy weekend of events and discussions and things around left forum and things like that. So this meeting was organized certainly by the collectivity that organized the 16 Beaver, but also the Brecht Forum. Originally, this talk was meant to take place at the Brecht Forum, but just considering proximity of 16 Beaver to PACE and Left Forum, we all had the idea that this would be a better place for it. But so I want to acknowledge the Brecht Forum's role in organizing tonight's event, but also to say I bet they're all at Left Forum right now, struggling to get over here as soon as possible.
I'm the co-chair of the board of the Brecht.
Oh, fantastic! Oh, good. So I'm glad there's.
The others are supposed to come.
Okay, good. And of course, yeah, PM Press and a new imprint that we're launching with PM Press called Common Notions is part of the celebration today as well. Selma's Sex, Race, and Class is the first title on that imprint. And just to get the procedural stuff out of the way, the book is for sale over there for $20, as well as a small library of other books as well. So there's that. And then maybe many of you have seen the announcement or heard just by word of mouth. There's a little gathering afterwards, or around 8 o'clock or so, where we'll transform the space once again and have some food and some drink and a chance to decompress from the weekend and talk and swap books, if anyone brought books to swap, purchase books, or share food and all that. So that'll be after our talk here.
Great. What is though, I want to know what the official.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to.
It's race, sex, and class. What are the terms of unity?
Yeah. There was a provocative power to the sisters and therefore to the class that would preface the title. But.
Okay, so yeah. Okay. Well, thank you very much. I'm really very interested and excited to see this speech. Now, can you hear me? You're having trouble hearing me in the back?
No, it's good.
You're all right there? Okay.
Maybe people can approach. There are some seats open further down.
It's clear, no problem.
Yeah, come in closer.
It's good, it's good.
You know, a space is really crucial, you know, as a hub for whatever else individuals and groups are doing. And for you to have gathered this space is really a great victory, especially in a city that's so expensive, you know, to rent anything. I think it's really a triumph, and I'm sure you gather a lot of strength from it. I've been speaking about sex, race, and class, and trying to, at various talks, you know, it's just like it's one talk and then it continues into the next talk with another topic, but it's really a continuation of the early one today, because I began with my history in something called the Johnson Forest Tendency, which was founded and led by a man called C.L.R. James, whom a lot of people know now, but who they didn't know for a very long time. He was a very obscure person who had written a great history book which was out of print in English and in every other language. And then he wrote a book on cricket, and people said, cricket? But it's really an interesting book, I think. And I typed it many times because it was before computers. So every single draft had to be retyped to the point where I thought the book should be published, you know, Beyond the Boundary by C.L.R. James, Childcare and Typing by Selma James. They don't have that. And one day people will publish it that way, after communism. But he was a really creative thinker and doer. And what he fundamentally said was the working class movement, as we know it, was polluted, was thwarted, was undermined by two forces. The first, social democracy, which was ready to give a little and take a lot. We knew about that. But second, Stalinism, which was the defeat of a great working class victory. That is, we had gained power in Russia, and by Russia, you have to know the idea that there was a Russian Revolution is true, but it's far too narrow. Russia was an imperialist power, and all of the nationalities made revolutions, or most of them. So to say that it was a Russian revolution is a piece of racism, really. It was the revolution of Russia and its colonies against, and the colonies were making revolutions against Russia, and in fact Lenin had to complain. He said, you scratch a Bolshevik and you find a Russian chauvinist, what we would call a racist. He said that because he really stood with the nationalities against the Bolshevik Party. He is a much greater man than the left gives him credit for.
Yes.
What they do is take the early work where he was really full of nonsense, trying not to be vulgar, and they base themselves on that, something called What Is to Be Done, which has many brilliant things in it, but which is a very reactionary document, which says the intellectuals have to teach the workers how to make the revolution. Now, you can't get worse than that. And the whole left, since the Russian, we'll call it the Russian Revolution for the time being, the whole of the left since the Russian Revolution, or almost all of them, base themselves on this document, What is to be Done, which Lenin, a few years later, said, why are you translating this? You haven't asked me. I'm not sure about it. He had a grave doubt soon because he was a man who could learn. That's the thing about Lenin I like. He was in the change mode. You know how you change a watch from one mode to another. His mode was change. And I hope that mine and that ours generally is that. So the left, when that revolution declined, what we got out of it, what we got out of this tremendous movement of workers and peasants and people all over the world who supported it, what we got out was Stalinism and the Vanguard Party. And that didn't do us one bit of good. So on the one hand, there was the social democracy, and on the other hand, there was Stalinism. And the social democracy was the unions and various others, labor parties. And the Stalinism was not only the Communist Party, but fundamentally also Trotskyism. Now you have to read what I've said, because I'm not trying to attack Trotsky. He was wrong, but he was a great man and contributed greatly to our movement. And I don't want the state to make a lot about that, but I do want to state that Trotskyism and Trotsky were somewhat different. Okay? They started out the same, but you know how it goes. What C.L.R. did was to say both the social democracy and Stalinism, as we inherited with this Vanguard Party, that has undermined the movement, and we have to find other ways of organizing. Now, I want to say one thing about that, and that is that you organize because you must organize. Just because there's a problem with organizing doesn't mean that you stop organizing. And I think that a lot of people think that leadership betrays, which indeed it has, and organizations you form are corrupted, which indeed they are, and therefore we're not going to organize. We're going to have spontaneity. Well, it doesn't, you know, you can't deal with the American state spontaneously. They will spontaneously put you in prison or shoot you to death, you know. That will be very spontaneous on their part. The point is how to decide to organize in ways that if they don't prevent that corruption of leadership and organization, at least guard against it and help you to be on guard all the time. So that's what he was proposing. I'm going to tell you more about that in a minute. The second thing that he did that was really new and different and important was to say that he called it the independent validity of the Negro struggle. Now that was the language at that time, and you will understand that they don't say black, they said Negro, because that was the word that had greatest dignity for people of color, of African descent. And he said that what black people organize in their struggle takes precedence over so-called working class struggle. That is, that black people's struggle against racism was not to be defeated or undermined or deprioritized over the struggle of working class people. I would say, this is many years later, other working class people, okay? In other words, I definitely, and the Wages for Housework movement generally, identifies the black struggle as a very crucial part of the working class struggle. He was also beginning with that, and beginning with the conception that in your organization there are black people who have something independent to say that the movement needs to hear and that your organization needs to take direction from. Beginning with that, he also supported the work that some of us did on women. Okay, and I was the great beneficiary of that support. And the book that you are offered, kindly offered for $20, begins in fact with a pamphlet that I wrote in 1952, because he urged that I write it, and I described the circumstances of that. He had the same attitude also to young people, what was called the youth. That is, that young people had a new, fresh view and a great deal of energy to give to the movement, and their point of view, and their, not potential, that's not the word I mean, and eliciting from them what they what they had to contribute was a crucial part of what your organization should be doing. Okay. And he said that working class people, narrowly defined, but women and men, young and old, and of different races, that working class people had to have their autonomy. He didn't use that word. That's a later word. But had to have also, in a way, independent validity. That is, they had revolutionary impulses which came from their situation, from their experience, and that had to be protected and enhanced and enabled by the organization. And he said the way to do that is to analyze the structure of the organization. And if you did do that, you would find that most organizations are composed of 3 layers. That's what interested you particularly. Well, it interests me particularly too. Which is the first layer, which in the case of the organization he formed, which was called the Johnson-Forrest Tendency. Johnson was C.L.R. James. Forrest was a woman called Raya Dunayevskaya, who was from Russia originally. The first layer are your leadership. They give theoretical direction, and they keep the organization together. That's a very big job. You know, people talk about they don't like leaders. I don't know how you do without leaders. Everybody has leaders. I don't mean Obama. I mean really. I mean leaders who help you to decide what you want to do with your life, your education, what your children, whatever it is. You are always dependent on what people who can give you. This is a marvelous phrase from a great yogi. Give you reliable testimony, where they will make judgments which is not based on their whims or prejudices, but on their understanding of you and their understanding of the situation. And we're all dependent on people like that. What's the mystery about this leadership thing? It's because they have so corrupted leadership, you know, most of the time, that nobody knows that that's what, at the heart of it, is what leaders are doing. And he said that first layer gives that kind of direction and helps to ensure that the various members are not only respected, as the left has never respected its membership since after Lenin, but you elicit from them what you need, what the organization needs, what the movement needs, and therefore what they need to really express their opposition to capital, all its ways and works. That's the leadership, that's the first layer. Union, they work in the trade union, they have some position, they have some positions in society, they are professionals perhaps. They have a role to play, but their role, it is not the same either as the top leadership or what he called the third layer, who are people, you know, usually referred to as ordinary. Now, I never met an ordinary person in my life. I don't know what it is to have an ordinary person, you know, but we use the word ordinary sometimes to mean somebody who does not have any purchase on power, who doesn't have, there's no rung of the ladder that they have risen in, You know, they're there just down at the grassroots. And he said that those are the people from whom leadership really comes. And I quoted today when Trotsky quotes Lenin saying that the membership of the Bolshevik Party is 10 times more revolutionary than the Central Committee. I thought it might have been a shock to the Central Committee to find that out. And that the membership, that the workers outside of the party were 100 times, is it 100 or 100 times, my son knows the material, 100 times more revolutionary than the membership. That's what Lenin thought. And I have to point out that when Lenin wanted to make the insurrection, the party did not want to do it. And he said, if you don't do it, I'll go over your heads to the masses, and we'll make the revolution without you. Then they shaped up. This is the party that we're supposed to follow, you understand? It is the most ridiculous and outrageous, you know, perpetration against us that the parties have imposed. Anyway, basing ourselves, because I was part of that organization, on this reading of the power relations within our organization, we put out a newspaper and did various other things where the third layer was moved to prominence, had to say what it thought, had to say what its friends thought, had to bring its friends to say what they thought, to write for the newspaper. And it was really, in a way, the first of the, or one of the first, of the alternative newspapers which burst out shortly after that during the 60s, but it was far more political than most. It wanted to overthrow the state, but it didn't say, let us overthrow the state. It didn't say, what did they say, come the revolution. They didn't say, what are the other, black and white united fight. It never said that, because that was the biggest lie being perpetrated by the left at that time. It had real respect and awareness of the struggle of black people and the struggle of women. It had a women's page, which the Los Angeles chapter wrote, and that's where I was in Los Angeles. It had a workers' page, which talked about the struggle in industry, and that was based in Detroit. It had a Negro page where black people wrote, you know, I remember one article, I just can't forget it, said this race is too hard to run. And you know, it was just how people talked about their own situation, and we got it down, at least that, in a period that was not conducive to that kind of thing. And it had a youth page as well, and talked about the strike in New York of students in the early 50s, I think it was. So that's the background that I come from. In the 1970s, as you know, the new women's movement burst out. And I was already, you know, very conscious of the role that women were playing. And I was very respectful of housewives because I had been one, and I knew how much work it was and how the whole society depended on us. And I put forward wages for housework. Some people were a bit dismayed, the left, and I wrote something called Women, the Unions and Work, or What is Not to Be Done, and they took great offense. So he said, you're not supposed to attack the unions. But I had worked in factories, and when you worked in a factory as a woman in Los Angeles, they took your dues and they gave you nothing for it. You know, and you know, you have a right to say that, but the left didn't feel that you could make an attack on the unions because they realized, as we all know, that without a union, you're also screwed. And with a union, you pay and you're screwed. And you don't know what to choose between the two. And it's a dilemma. It's the same dilemma that we were talking about, you know, all the organizations get corrupted. And does that mean you don't have an organization? Of course not. You need the union. It's a protection. The fact that it's there absolutely means that they're not going to lower your pay unless, of course, in now, you know, they're doing exactly that, and the union is making deals left and right for your pay to be lowered. But up to now, it has not been like that. And Sam, who's spent the last 30 or 40 years in trade unions, might want to say something later. One thing that was clear by the 1970s and the women's movement was that there were other movements at the same time. There was the black movement, there was the immigrants movement, there was the movement of lesbian and gay people, there were the prostitutes movement, and there were, you know, all the hookers, sex workers in Paris in 1975 took over all the churches. And who defeated them were the police and the pimps who came in together, because both of them were pimps, really. And, you know, and then the feminists, some of the feminists didn't want to support prostitutes and said, you know, those of us who were prostitutes were, what were we doing? I can't remember. What were we doing? We were doing something terrible. I can't remember the phrase, but it's something like we were reinforcing sex role stereotyping. You know, it is as though they didn't understand that all women have to sell and use our sex to get on, to survive. We like not to. We prefer to do it not for money, but for love. But you know, sometimes you don't have a choice. So you do what you can, and you expect other women to respect your choice. That's what I think that a women's movement should do. Well, there were not many of us who thought that, but we got by. And so little by little, we built an organization based on the grassroots. We didn't say working class, because working class meant those men who were in factories. And almost none of us were in factories. Some of us were nurses, some of us were waitresses, but a lot of us were mothers and grandmothers and young girls starting out, and some of us had professions in that. And we wanted to be open to women who were not traditionally working class, but who saw their work as housewives as a part of the exploitation of their male partners. And that included, I mentioned this the other night, I want to make it clearer this time, a woman who was the wife of the head of Chrysler Europe, who had to entertain for him and meet his friends and his associates, and who hated it. She liked her husband, but she hated the kind of work she had to do, and she said, I am employed by Chrysler Europe, but I don't get wages for it. Come in with us. Why not? What was lost? The class line did not get in the way of the class alliance, of the class identification. Another woman who is still with us was the wife, they're both retired now, was the wife of a manager in the oil industry. And she knew she worked for the oil industry. She was absolutely certain of that and was absolutely delighted to be part of the Wages for Housework campaign, and has been a stalwart of the campaign, saying she wants wages. She definitely wants the state to acknowledge what she contributes to society as a mother and a wife. Aside from everything else that she's doing, she feels that she is reproducing the human race, and that that's not irrelevant to the society. And increasingly, we have been clearer also about all the other work that women do without wages. You see, the fact that it had no wage meant that it was invisible and unrecognized. And we fought for the recognition of that work. We fought to describe that work. Some of that is in the book. You know, to say, what is it that this work does? And we fought also that this work should have wages, and that we should get that money for. You want to know where the money should come from? let it come from the military budget, and we said invest in caring, not killing, which every woman understood in its political implications. It doesn't say end capitalism. It's true, it doesn't, but it implies it. If you want the money to come to the carers and not to the military, that is rather a change of priorities of the society. And we don't see much proof that this is coming, for example, from the American government. And women like that. And women were the ones who were really reproducing the human race. Now that's not a small thing, as I've said, and I complained today, and nobody objected, so I can complain again, that the left has not acknowledged that the reproduction of the human race is an important thing which they must fight to defend, beginning with fighting to defend those who do the reproducing. I mean, not only the birth of children and the feeding of children of the food that the children need, that is breastfeeding, not the junk food of formula, the first junk food, and then you go right on to McDonald's from formula, you know, that will kill you in the end. But also the caring work, the work that enables us to relate to each other, the civilizing work, that is, they civilize you as well as the people that you care for. And it's my considered view that part of the civilization of the male part of the human race is for there to be them to be carers to a much greater degree than they are. I'm not talking about men helping. Men have to help. That goes without saying. But I'm talking about the fact that men who want to, and I think there are increasing numbers, are not saying loud and clear enough that they cannot work these ridiculous hours having 2 and 3 jobs because they have to take care of their children, because their children need them and because they need their children. That's what I call civilization. That's what I call a working class demand. Okay. Now, we described in the 70s this hierarchy of labor powers. That's Marx's phrase. It means that's what you sell to capital, your ability to work, your labor power. And how this hierarchy of labor powers, this hierarchy of sex, race, age, nationality, disability and ability, whether you're a hooker or whether you're an illegal prisoner, whoever, you know, that this really shapes the whole society. And you can see the hierarchy of the society in the wages that are and are not received. Because at the bottom of the wage hierarchy is the unwaged hierarchy, and you have 80% of the food grown in Africa being grown by women almost exclusively unwaged. No, Africa would not eat without this work, but they're not working really because they're not getting wages for it. You know, this is absolutely outrageous and insane and very capitalistic, because the starting point of capital is not who does well as a result of the work, but who makes profit as a result of the work. So that the work that may make profit, but they can get away without paying for, you know, is not acknowledged in the left. This is, you know, I'm almost tempted to say this is sinful, except I don't believe in religion. You know, it is really so counter-human, so lacking in the basics of Marxism, because what I'm saying, Marx knew, he didn't emphasize it. He was doing something else. I'm not complaining about it because he knew that. He said it was production for production's sake. It wasn't production for us. You know, it was we produced for producing. We didn't produce so that we had more or better or who are thriving as a result. And that sense of the kind of activity that the human race is involved in, you know, is not an important part of how the left has viewed or conveyed their view of the world. Well, now, that's fundamentally all that I wanted to say, except that we have built, oh yes, there's one other thing. If you have a society which is hierarchical in the way that I've described, what do you do about organizing against the hierarchy? Do you ignore it? Well, hardly. You know, this thing, you know who did that at great cost to us was the South African anti-apartheid movement. They didn't say they were anti-racist, you know. They said they were non-racial. That meant that there was no problem between the black ANC, or black people generally, and the South African Communist Party and the leadership of the ANC. And I'm telling you, there was a terrible problem between them. They were at loggerheads for a lot of the time. And the result was, since it was not solved, the result was that the South African Revolution didn't quite happen. That's another subject, if you want to discuss it, you must say. But you cannot ignore the hierarchy. You must, in fact, build your organization aiming to undermine it among you and in the society generally. That is, you undermine it for yourself and the way you work, and therefore you extend that and undermine it in every area. You stand with those who are the most exploited, and their demands become and must become the demands of every other sector. So that wages due lesbians, I think they don't call themselves, they just changed their name to Queer Strike from the Global Women's Strike. The demands of those who are sexual outlaws of many types, you know, their demands to have the right and to have the money in order to live the sexual life that they want, you know, must be everybody's demand and everybody's right, because it's everybody's sexual right to have that choice and not to have sexual outlaws as a discipline on those of us who are not sexual outlaws. And that's true on race, that's true on gender, that's true on every area. And the way we dealt with it was, it happened naturally, but we built on it, was that independent organizations were built within the Wages for Housework campaign, which were those sectors who were particularly exploited or particularly exploited in a certain way. So there's wages due lesbians, I say now they're Queer Strike. There's used to be women of color, black women for wages for housework. Black meant at that time, in the 70s in Britain in particular, it meant everybody who was not white. You know, even Turkish people considered themselves black, the most conscious of them. But now that meaning has gone, and they call themselves women of color, a Global Women's Strike. They're a single mother's self-defense, an organization of women with disabilities, an organization of prostitutes, the English Collective of Prostitutes. I was the first spokeswoman. I knew nothing about it. They educated me, and I found out a lot about prostitution, especially when somebody saw a picture of my husband, and she said, "So that is your client?" That rather surprised me. I had never thought of it that way. But after some thought, I said yes. It didn't mean, it wasn't disrespectful of the man. It just meant, listen, there's a sexual power relation going on here. Admit it if you want to represent us. And I did, and I think I was a good spokeswoman. They never complained. So that is where we stand. That is what we do. And we do that in an international context. And I think that's really all I want to say to open up the discussion, and then people can say, ask, comment as you like.
I'm curious about maybe how
You have to speak loud, I won't hear you.
I'm curious about how another analysis of gender would apply to, well, first of all, I want to say thank you, and I think the articulation that came from Wages for Housework continues to be really inspiring in terms of just the vocabulary for an unwaged labor and even bringing that visibility. But I guess my question is how maybe another analysis of gender would meet that articulation that you've been working on, just in terms of like one thought that comes to me is like the trans woman and how she fits into that equation in terms of her reproductive contributions, and what you're locating is like bodies born with uteruses and vaginas and like have this certain space within that housework formula. So I wanted to introduce that into the conversation and see where that dialogue is within your own thinking, I guess. Do you follow what I'm saying?
I'm not sure I understand. Can you tell me?
I'm trying to ask about looking at gender not just assigned to that.
Biology.
Yes, I'm looking at gender. I'm looking at like cisgender and gender assignment and asking that because this body is born.
Oh, I see, because of the biological.
Yes, the gender could be is an assignment, and often reinforces a lot of capitalist
Yes.
exploitation.
Okay,
Yeah.
I understand what you're saying. Okay, first of all, I don't think that necessarily your biology has to result in your being a carer. I believe that is part of our exploitation, is that our biology is exploited. I don't think it's nice to make children who are going to be exploited. I think it's terrible. You know, I think it's a disaster that women have to suffer. And I don't think, you know, I think that anybody is able to take care of children. I think for the first 2 years of life, I think the mother is absolutely urgent and should have the support of the whole society. That's what I mean. The reproduction of the human race must be a priority. And if a mother is having a child, the whole of the society must be, she must have childcare when she needs it, she must have breaks away, she must have everything she needs in order to make her unique contribution to the society, because what she is doing is so important to the society. But I don't think that has to define her. I think in this society, it absolutely defines you. It defines you as a slave. And then they glorify motherhood. You know, I know about that. I'm not talking about the glorification of motherhood so that we can keep working and shut up. I'm saying that we want money for this because we want to make it clear that it's a job in many respects, not in every, but in many respects like any other, and we want society to acknowledge that work and not to punish us because we're stuck with it. That is another look at biology. You know, we started to work on breastfeeding and we began to discover what is going on biologically in breastfeeding that we need to know about. We know it's the best food, okay. But there are whole sets of things that women have now found out about breastfeeding, about how the relationship between mother and child is biologically cemented, how her digestion is held, how whole sets of things, and recovering from childbirth, a whole set of things result in the fact that she is breastfeeding for her and for the child. And I don't think that's bad. I think it's great. I don't see why women should be pulled down and discriminated against and pushed around and beaten and raped because we have this facility which the human race needs. You see, I'm not afraid of biology. You know, we went to the United Nations. Pat is not here, Pat is gone. Pat and a couple of other women, Solving, went to the United Nations because not the United Nations, the
International Labor Organization.
the International Labor Organization, to talk about breastfeeding breaks for mothers, that they had to have some kind of a rule on that. And you know, those organizations, they take one from the employer and one from the employee and one from the union, and they debate it and they fight about it and they do a whole set of things. We went through it all. And the women who were the liberated women, I'm afraid, from, was it Sweden, Scandinavia?
Sweden.
Was Sweden, yes, with half the cabinet is women. They said women should not have breastfeeding breaks because they would undermine their equity in the job market. Well, with friends like that, who needs enemies? The fact is, women are not equal to men. Why should we be equal? We don't need equality, we need equity. We need to have an even break. But women, you know, they talked about the women. I remember I went to this conference on criminology in Cambridge, representing the English Collective of Prostitutes. And they were saying, these great academic feminists were saying that women should be equal before the courts. I said, excuse me, I do not want equality. He comes in, he won, as we say in Trinidad, and she comes with 4 kids behind her. How could they be equal? She needs special treatment. She has 4 children. Have you not noticed the children? You know, and well, I got them to back down because I was so furious, you know. There is nothing wrong with having children. It is a contribution to the society, and we have the mechanism for actually creating them. And why should we be deprived of equity because we make a contribution? Because the market says we don't need to. That's the point. That is what is dominating our biological nature, is the market's, what do you call it, priorities. The market's values. We don't want the market's values. We are anti-capitalist. We want every human being to make every contribution to the society that they can and want to. We don't want to say, you shouldn't have children, or if you have children, you should go back to work within 6 months. So, you know, we're trying to be individuals who live our lives in a loving and caring way. And our biology is not an encumbrance, it is a contribution. And I do believe that if feminism is too dominated by the market and the values of the market, and has not been able to see the division of labor, which is trapping women, first of all by our biology, but then trapping us to deny the work that our biology imposes on us, and therefore that the society must pay for and help with. You see, we get it both ends. You know, we're punished for our biology, and then we're punished again because our biology produces what society needs. No, I don't accept. I think women are really persecuted for our biology, but I'm not ready to deny mine. I would not. Why should I? I think it's fine. I don't think there's anything wrong with me because I have the ability to make children. I don't think it has to be a weakness on my part. It has to be a social strength, and therefore I'm making a particular contribution. And I think every man here would appreciate.
Not necessarily a question of, it's not only a question of the sexual divisions between production and reproduction, and the way the wage organizes those divisions, and the hierarchies and the dominations of production. But also something that I'm not sure how to fill in the blank at this point.
I guess, just that gender is to be looking at gender as a construction that society assigns you. That because the way biologically your body's born isn't necessarily the gender of your disposition / path to come. And that by starting to unravel those gender assignments, we might be able to also get at this like commodity exchange as an economy.
Commodity of,
Well, or these economies that are dividing those labors, right? What I'm trying to say is that, like, what I find in the wages for housework analysis is that bodies with uteruses are being associated as the bodies of the house worker, this
of the carer.
or the carer, exactly. And so, what other bodies can we see at this time right now in this decade of that can be in that same economic formula, I guess, you know what I mean? What you're setting up in terms of that analysis is like, well, what other bodies that are not just bodies with uteruses that also can, sit in that space that's also exploited. And to me, I do think of the trans woman, who she's not born with a uterus, she's, biologically, she's composed as what we would define as a man, right? So, but who is she in terms of that economic structure that you're putting forward? That's my question, I guess.
I don't know if it helps, but I could just point out that it's wages for housework and not wages for housewives.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. That's why
So it's not tied to the.
To the biology.
It's not tied to the biology. It's tied to the work.
Yeah.
That's right.
But we see often. That's what I looked at. It's like trying to, I guess, find more vocabulary than just around the reproduction as, as a.
It opened up. Selma, you have to say more, but what wages for housework did for a lot of us was to open up all the areas of work that all of us do, men, women, transgender, etc., right? Which is not at the moment counted.
Yes.
They count a very limited piece of our day. Even within the context of the union, right? I got members who drive 150 miles to get to work, right? On an LA freeway, that's 2 or 3 hours sometimes, right? Whereas the mine workers, fought a long time ago and got portal to portal, so that all of their travel time and a lot of stuff was also included. So, society has set up certain norms for what's paid for, but it doesn't look at that as being work. What wages for housework did, among other things, right, was to establish that work was more than what the employer was going to determine was worthy of their paying you for. And I don't know if that helps in any way at getting at some point.
I hear that in that. Maybe I just wanted to hear it more.
There are
Sorry.
a couple of other hands here. It's hard because we can't see each other. So.
Well, one thing that I've heard the wages for housework people say that I think was very clarifying for me is, and I hope this is still accurate, you can correct me if I'm not quoting it right, but is like, we don't want, as women, we don't want to stop doing caring work, or you could say as male carers too. As carers, we don't want to stop doing caring work, we just want more people to do it. We just don't want to be the only ones doing it. And I think one of the sort of risks sometimes when we talk about like gender assignment only in terms of talking about identity is that we don't talk about work. And so then we're sort of just talking about people's experience of themselves, often before they have children. And some people do, some people go through a lot of stages and then later go back and have children. I know several people who have done that. And I'm not saying that's right or wrong. I think all our journeys are full of integrity for exactly how they are. But I think it's important not to be confused when we're talking about identity. It's not exactly the same thing as talking about work. And we should try to be clear. There's a lot there. I don't know. We should try to really think about how sometimes the way we talk about identity is constrained by unspoken notions about work and who does work. But I really think that the trans community and the queer movement is really an important way that we could be asking some of these questions about how can more of us do caring work in a way that's not just sort of penalized, sort of like targeted to a certain sort of biological demographic. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think one thing that, and I can't take credit for thinking these things through because I think like this was awesome women who are here, but in reading a lot of your work and Sophie Terricci's work and the Polina Krishnati's work and all of these things that we've kind of come to around gender is the way that also the sexual division of labor creates and defines like these very categories. And the relationship between that and the struggle around gender identity and sexuality, so that we understand that these categories created through work and through the sexual division of labor are material, and we experience them materially in our everyday life, and that they can contain within them their own contradiction. Right, so like for example, like being a mother. So it's like you were saying, perhaps you have a desire to be a mother, and that desire is social, right? You can't say that it's all just because I feel this thing. It's like also a social desire, but then perhaps you also have the desire to not have a child who will grow up and become exploited, or you would like to express your gender in a way where you perhaps enjoy one aspect of like what's come to be known as a particular feminine gender identity, but also something that is not feminine. And the very fact that these categories exist is part of the exploitation of, it's not just oppression, right, it's part of the actual exploitation. But then to fight against it, it can be extremely liberating, and I think it's really important to create in our own communities the space to subvert that gender identity and subvert the identity of sexuality, while still recognizing that even that subversion is happening within the context of of a particular social and political situation. So sometimes I also feel like it's amazing to be able to express yourself in whatever way you desire, but I think that sometimes that expression gets fetishized, and the kind of understanding of also its sociality gets kind of missed a little bit.
I think if women got money for the work, it would be looked at differently. I think that that's a crucial element. The fact that we can have this discussion has to do precisely with the fact that the work is unwaged, and therefore in crucial respects unrecognized, without the good housekeeping seal of approval, which is wages. You have money, you're getting money, you're able to deal independently with the world, and that changes how you are looked at and how your function is looked at. And that's one of the reasons that we are for wages for housework. But I think it's absolutely crucial that men do this work. And I did say that to begin with. It's crucial for men. It's crucial for children, and it's crucial for women. It is crucial because caring for others is part of the relationships in society that we want for ourselves. We want caring relationships. And you don't just take care of a child. The child is not an object. You have a relationship with the child, especially if you have time and you're not running to meet a deadline. And I think that we live in a murderous society which murders relationships because we are chased by time clocks. I think that that's really crucial. So if we get some money, we can tell them to go to hell and sit there and do as we like and form the relationships we want to form. At least we can begin to do that.
I wonder though I understand that it's important to say that, or to have said that in the 70s, that also housework is work and it should be one has to earn money through it, but I have a fear today to say that, in the sense that am I too much adjusting to a paradigm that is not mine, that everything has to be evaluated only through money for it to be respected, or do I have to make all relations exchange relations rather than another kind of relation? For me, if the struggle is bigger, on a bigger level, I would like to see society in general, the idea of work be changed. So this is a little problem for me now, how to think about it, even though I understand the relevance of thinking, of evaluating this work. But work is a problem in general, I find, in our society. So
Absolutely horrendous. And that, in a crucial sense, I won't say more now, but in a crucial sense, I want wages for housework so that caring is no longer work, so that caring really does become the end and aim of society.
I'm wondering what your thoughts are, though, of a struggle in Canada and maybe in the US is the living caregiver program, where predominantly women from the Philippines do get paid for caring, but they don't get status, and they have to live with families for 4 years before they can even get status in Canada, and have very poor workers' rights. And this has been an option actually for now more middle-class families because there is no universal daycare system, and so instead the government has created kind of a labor apartheid for living caregivers to come to Canada temporarily to care for other people's children. So I'm wondering, how does this analysis, I guess, what are your thoughts on that kind of growing phenomenon now, where now more middle-class families with disposable income because of 2 working parents can now have a living caregiver program to, that who are waged, I mean poorly, but waged to take care of children, and where that fits in with this movement?
Well, I think that a lot of feminism in Britain among the elite, and there is no question that women have joined the elite. And I have an article with me which shows that the class line among women is much stronger now, since women have joined the elite who don't really live the lives that other women live. I think that elite is based on either not having children or on having third world women take care of your children. And I want to say something else also, that it's very clear, we began in 1972. A lot of women decided that they didn't want to fight for wages for housework, that they were just going to take a job. That was the same thing. It was the same wages for housework movement. They said, we can't. I mean, it's going to take too long, and there's too much this and too much that. I'll just get a job, and then I can kick this man out, or demand, like the women in the factory where I work, demand, once I have that money, that we have equal status in the home, and various things, that you do with money when you get it. But I think that's changing. I saw that happen. We all saw that happen. The thousands and millions of women who went down and do the double day, and now when the economic crisis, the triple day, they're killing themselves. They're exhausted by all this work that they're doing, because they haven't been relieved of that housework, and they haven't been relieved of that childcare. And I think that women are beginning to, and the surveys seem to point to it, I want to go back home. I am tired of worrying about my children and what's happening to them when I'm away. I'm exhausted by this double day, and they owe me the money. And not only that, we know they have the money. The English Collective of Prostitutes did a great job with the Wages for Housework campaign in the early days, because they used to get up at meetings and say, they say the money doesn't exist to pay us, but we have seen the money they say doesn't exist. Because when those sheikhs, the oil sheikhs used to come to London, they peel off these enormous wads of cash that women would tell us about, boy, you should have seen that guy, etc. And they went to the gaming houses with them. Some of them were high-class hookers, and they had a lot to report about the money that there was. And we've seen the money that the banks took. And we've seen the money that the CEOs have taken. I don't think women have paid attention to that, you know, and say, well, I think a lot of people are turning on to it now. But even if they don't, the whole thrust is precisely to validate women's work and to have that regarded as important contribution.
My question
I must know space. And I'm not used to that accent anymore.
I'm just sorry that the person who had asked the question. Oh, okay. I'm just kind of more sort of curious about some of the responses that I heard. I mean, and tell me if I'm mishearing this, and maybe this is more also a question for the folks that responded to the question. So what I'm hearing is like sort of, you know, questioning gender identity is somehow not as important because there's no materiality, there's no production or productive value attached to it, as much as like advocating for anything that has like some kind of like labor power associated with it. I was particularly troubled by your comments, you know, in you saying that it was more of this sort of conscious experience that, you know, people can sort of have, but then it's a stage. That's a stage that people can go through, you know. And I just feel like, I mean, I was trying to think, like, in what cases is, you know, sort of, you know, choosing another identity? In what sense is that linked to sort of modes of production? But I just don't want to, like, I don't want to, like, reduce everything to material production. I feel like, you know, it doesn't invalidate that somehow.
Yeah,
and maybe I'm not speaking to this quite right, but I just wasn't satisfied with how the discussion just moved on from there.
It's called conflation.
If I could just quickly.
Conflation. Conflation. It's a conflationary relationship.
Go ahead.
Well, I just think this is a huge question, and I was just trying to offer, like, you know, one particular kernel, and I think it would take a long time to discuss it. But the kernel that I was trying to offer was this this idea that we want more people to do caring labor, not just people that are biologically accepting the assignment of female.
Right. No, I get that, and I understand that point, but it was more your comments, you know, sort of maybe before or after, more just about how, you know, gender identity is this sort of like, you know, sort of willful thing that one can sort of do as they please, and ultimately they will then revert back to their biological destiny.
I don't think that I said that or intended to imply that. I think that I did say that I think that there's a risk when we discuss identity and do not discuss labor at all. And I will repeat that. I think that that's accurate. I'm not saying that there's no point to discussing identity and no point to experiencing identity in and of itself. That's not what I'm saying. But I do think that there is a risk when we don't, when we only, when we don't have these discussions with reference to actual questions about division of labor at all. And do you hear the difference between saying that both discussions are important and relevant and relegating one to the other? I'm not meaning to relegate one to the other. What I'm trying to do is say that both really need to be brought on the table as we do this work of figuring out how to transform gender and gender relationships.
If I could chime in, it's not just about gender. I think there's something much deeper going on here. I think it's just like somebody else chimed in and said it was about work in general and what we want work to be. So like that tying in the identity and the labor is, to me, is very important, because the way I see it is women are given this role because of their identity, right? You have to be the housewife, you have to do the reproductive labor because it's biologically inclined, and that's the way it works. But lots of other people within our society are automatically given an identity and then tied in with the labor like that you're supposed to be doing because of that identity. So with black people, it's like, oh, you're just supposed to be the service people. And oops, after World War II, and you just like, you're superfluous labor, you have to go to jail. And that's where the drug war comes in and throws everybody in jail and just makes them, you know, a commodity in that sense. So, and there's lots of other identities within our society that are automatically given roles that are tied to labor and that give